This is a Tuesday night, October 23rd update on Tropical Storm Sandy and its potential to impact the U.S. East Coast. As of the 5 p.m. Eastern Time advisory from the National Hurricane Center, maximum sustained winds are 50 miles per hour, the current movement is toward the north-northeast at 6 miles per hour, and hurricane warnings are now in effect for all of Jamaica and eastern Cuba. A tropical storm watch has also been issued for much of the Bahamas. As you can see, by 2 p.m. Wednesday, the storm is forecast to make landfall across Kingston, Jamaica as a minimal Category 1 hurricane and at least temporarily weaken as it crosses over some of the higher terrain of eastern Cuba before emerging in the southwest Atlantic and the Bahamas. This track would take the storm close enough towards southeast Florida to where, although direct impacts would not be felt, but you would be feeling the effects of beach erosion and gusts exceeding potentially tropical storm force, and the National Hurricane Center has already said that tropical storm watches may have to go into effect as early as later tonight. Elsewhere, beyond days 4 and 5, the forecast is very uncertain. The current 5-day track takes the storm toward the northeast, which would imply a track out to sea. However, even the models that take the storm toward New England beyond day 5 are also suggesting at least somewhat of a turn toward the northeast before it makes a turn back toward the northwest. So don't get too carried away by just extrapolating beyond the 5-day forecast position. Again, the probability of sustained tropical storm force winds along southeast Florida are relatively low. The current probabilities are set at 10 to 20% based on the current track. Of course, this is still somewhat subject to change if that track deviates a little bit more toward the west, but as it stands right now, you can expect some fairly decent winds with perhaps maybe more so in the way of gusts exceeding tropical storm force and potentially some squalls if the center moves close enough toward Miami. Of course, the National Weather Service office in Miami, Florida is closely monitoring the progress of Sandy, and earlier this afternoon they published a briefing discussing what some of the dangers could be for that region. In terms of winds, they're expecting gusts exceeding 50 miles per hour and as high as 60 miles per hour offshore. As a result, wave heights will be in excess of 15 to 20 feet. Rip currents will be a very significant concern for anyone in the water, so of course swimming is going to be not allowed along the beaches as we head deeper into the week. Beach erosion is going to be a major problem, and coastal flooding, especially near Biscayne Bay, could be a bit of a concern as we have a very prolonged period of northeasterly winds, and that could allow the water to pile up, especially along the southern end of Biscayne Bay. The National Weather Service offices across the Mid-Atlantic and New England states are also beginning to alert the public of this potential storm. This is the latest executive summary from the Mount Holly or Philadelphia Weather Office, and they are simply stating that there is at least a chance for a historic fall season nor'easter, and of course this is relating to Tropical Storm Sandy. There is that chance that Sandy could become a hybrid storm and rapidly intensify as it heads toward New England if it does indeed decide to take that more northwesterly track beyond day 5. Meanwhile, the Hydrometeorological Prediction Center in Maryland is also closely monitoring the storm because of its potential. The following is an excerpt from their latest afternoon discussion. The afternoon 12Z on the 23rd run of the ECMWF model still incorporates an extremely deep post-tropical Sandy into the mid-level pivot point of the polar jet in the vicinity of Long Island early next Tuesday. The dynamic transfer resulting in a minimum pressure of at least 932 millibars. Therein lies the storm's menace, a powerhouse capable of whipping the Atlantic into a frenzy and churning up dangerous tides. Of particular note is the coincidence of the full moon on Sunday, often significant factor in historical events. The ocean effects of the system may still be realized even if the post-tropical storm Sandy does not make landfall in the United States. Besides the wind, the other sensible weather threat is heavy rains with heavy snows possible on the southwest side of the hybrid circulation, where continental polar air rushes across the central Appalachians. You can see the presence of Tropical Storm Sandy situated to the south of Jamaica as we begin our analysis using the latest visible satellite animation, and as we turn to the enhanced infrared, you can see that convection, although still plentiful, is not quite as abundant as it was during the early morning hours earlier today. However, this is a pretty common time for convection to be at a minimum in the late afternoon to early evening hours, and we expect the convection to at least temporarily blossom once again as we head deeper into the overnight and early morning hours as we head on into the day on Wednesday. Also, as we take a look at the water vapor, you can see that there is a trough still anchored out across the northwest Caribbean, and some dry air along with southwest vertical wind shear may help to at least somewhat mitigate the intensity of Sandy as it approaches Jamaica, although I still feel as though the Category 1 hurricane intensity landfall forecast is valid. Nearly all of the intensity models show Sandy becoming a minimal hurricane before arriving in the Greater Antilles, and the track forecast is high confidence, especially within the next 72 hours. So all interests across this region should be bracing for a minimal hurricane, and perhaps more importantly the risk of life-threatening floods in the higher terrain where rainfall amounts are maximized, especially out across western Hispaniola. Despite the fact that Haiti will be far removed from the center of circulation, you can expect a lot of rainfall activity there, and it doesn't help that 98% of Haiti's trees have been cut down for other use, and that makes the soil more prone to severe mudslides as the roots aren't there to really hold the soil together. As we've stated for several days now, the main forecast uncertainty arises once the storm begins to exit the Bahamas, and as you can see here, the latest 12Z run from the GFS Ensemble members show that the tracks are pretty much split. We've got several of the ensembles showing a track out to sea or first initially toward Bermuda, whereas compared to yesterday, we still have quite a lot more tracks now implying at least somewhat of a threat toward the Mid-Atlantic or New England states. As you recall, at this time yesterday, nearly all of the GFS ensembles were suggesting a track out to sea. Furthermore, we are not any closer to a model consensus because the Canadian model has been persistently showing a Mid-Atlantic or New England strike. However, this afternoon's run shows a more northeasterly track out to sea, which is in more agreement with the initial GFS Ensemble model consensus. One has to compare the Canadian model solution with the persistent runs from the 12Z ECMWF. You can see the storm is forecast to be over the Bahamas as a 965 millibar hurricane by Friday morning, and by day 4 and day 5 it becomes apparent that the developing hurricane, or at least transitioning hurricane more so into a subtropical storm, is beginning to phase with this trough approaching from the Great Lakes and Ohio Valley. As we work our way into day 6 and day 7, the trough fully captures the tropical cyclone, and it's moving into the Long Island area as a sub 940 millibar hybrid low pressure system, more so in the way of a nor'easter. Finally, we're going to take a more detailed look at the 18Z run of the GFS to explain why there is such a large degree of model spread and uncertainty beyond days 3 and 4. Starting at 72 hours, you can see that the GFS is placing Tropical Storm or potentially even Hurricane Sandy out across the northern Bahamas, and in this run, the tropical cyclone is a little closer to South Florida than prior GFS solutions. But more importantly, beyond day 3, it's going to be the overall synoptic weather pattern that drives the track of the storm. There are 3 main players on the field. We first have this very large central Atlantic upper level low situated to the southeast of the Atlantic provinces of Canada. We also have a small degree of upper level ridging over the U.S. East Coast, and we also have a long wave trough out across the Midwest United States. The Northwest Atlantic low has been quasi-stationary for the past several days, and it's slowing up the westerly flow across the entire northern hemisphere. As a result, as long as that upper level low does not move much over the next week or so, we're still going to be dealing with some ridging over New England, along with a long wave trough out across the Midwest and Ohio valleys. This upper level trough is going to have the natural tendency to move more toward the east, but as long as it's being blocked from doing so, there will be the tendency for more of these short wave troughs embedded within the long wave trough to dive a little bit more toward the south into the Tennessee Valley. In the event that a pocket of this energy moves into the Tennessee Valley, that would make the transition into a hybrid storm and a full-out phase with the trough itself much more likely. However, the GFS is different from some of the other model solutions that we just looked at because it is starting to move the upper level feature over the Atlantic more so toward the east, and therefore the overall pattern out across the Northeast and Midwest United States becomes more progressive. The trough does not send pockets of shortwave energy into the Tennessee Valley. Instead, the trough is much flatter, which makes a full-out phase with the tropical cyclone much less likely, and instead the storm moves safely out to sea without hardly impacting the U.S. East Coast much at all. However, even with this solution in mind, if we rewind just a little bit and go back to day 5 or 120 hours, we do see, for example, this shortwave trough moving out across Indiana. If this trough were just a little bit more toward the south, just by 1 or 2 states, that can make all the difference because even in this model solution, the storm is very close to phasing with the trough. And just to elaborate even further, here is the day 5 position of that shortwave trough over Indiana. If we change sectors to the North American sector really quickly, let's go back and trace where this energy is forecast to originate from. So we're going to go from day 5 to the initial time frame, which is right now, and you can link that troughing all the way out into the North Pacific. And that's another important thing to realize, because one must understand that the amount of weather observations across the Northern Pacific are very limited, and without initialization data to go into the models, that's just going to be another reason for the models to struggle, especially beyond day 5. So simply put, there are just too many variables and too many uncertainties this far in advance to really tell you with any vote of confidence that the storm will either A, go out to sea, or B, make that turn into the mid-Atlantic or New England states as a major nor'easter. So that's just a taste of what forecasters all across the eastern United States will have to be dealing with over the next week or so. And we here at 28storms.com will try to keep you updated as much as we can, whether it be through our Facebook and Twitter updates or our extensive blogs and video updates on 28storms.com and the Hurricane Tracker app.